पिछले कई हफ्तों से आदरणीय अर्नब जी हाथ मुंह धोके बीबीसी के पीछे पड़े हुए हैं।
द बोरिंग ब्रॉडकास्टिंग कॉर्पोरेशन।
वेरी बोरिंग अर्नब। बीजेपी स्पोकी गौरव भाटिया हैज अ मच मोर मसालेदार फुल फॉर्म देन यू डिड।
भ्रष्ट बकवास कॉर्पोरेशन।
वेलकम टू अमृत काल, जहां हमें जर्नलिज्म, गुड जर्नलिज्म, एथिक्स और डिसेंसी पे ज्ञान गौरव भाटिया देंगे। यस, this guy gave a 20-minute press conference on what a journalistic organization should and should not do. This guy gave a press conference on the low, such low standards of the BBC. This guy.
सुनिए, ऐसा है, पप्पू की प्रवक्ता, बिस्किट खिलाऊं क्या? पेडिग्री का बिस्किट खिलाऊं? अभी निकाल के खिला दूंगा, बिस्किट चुप हो जाएंगे।
तुम्हारे जैसे
अब्बाजान क्या हुआ? अब्बूजान,
बड़े पूंजीपतियों के पैसे नहीं लेते हैं।
क्या हुआ अब्बूजान?
अपने वर्कर्स के पैसे।
अब्बूजान बीच में गुस्सा क्यों हो गए? लैला और लैला कर रहे हो ना, ऐसी लैला बनाएंगे कि तुम्हारा मजनू भी पास नहीं फटकेगा।
आगे जाने से पहले प्रेस दैट लाइक बटन, डू इट। तुम्हें अमृत काल की सौगंध। प्रेस द लाइक बटन एंड लेट्स बिगिन द बीबीसी बैशिंग।
बीबीसी का जो इतिहास है, कलंकित, काला, द्वेष भावना से भारत के खिलाफ कार्य करने का रहा है।
बीबीसी का इतिहास बिल्कुल कलंकित, एकदम काला। इतिहास से हमें ये 8 साल पुराना न्यूज क्लिप याद आ गया।
ये भाजपा का एक षड्यंत्र है कि किस तरह से वो इस देश को बांटे, कैसे इस देश में सौहार्द बिगड़े और जगह जगह पे सांप्रदायिक दंगे हों।
अगर हम गौरव जी की माने तो 2014 में बीबीसी नहीं, बीजेपी देश को तोड़ने का काम कर रही थी। चलो छोड़ो कल की बातें, इतिहास में क्या रखा है? जस्ट दोस डैम मुगल्स। लेट्स टॉक अबाउट द प्रेजेंट बीबीसी। हाउ लो, हाउ एंटी नेशनल,
हाउ venomous, how shallow the reporting of the BBC is.
BBC, how dare you be venomous and shallow? This is something only Indian TV news anchors and Indian party spokespersons are allowed to be on primetime Indian TV news. How dare you steal their thunder? सिर्फ गौरव और उनके प्राइम टाइम साइडकिक्स ये काम कर सकते हैं। शुद्ध देसी घी, मेक इन इंडिया जहर।
मौलाना जी, भारत के इतिहास में भगवान राम से बढ़ के कोई नहीं है। हमारे रोम रोम में एक मुस्लिम पार्टी जो ये कहती है भगवान राम काल्पनिक है, मंदिर में लड़के लड़कियां छेड़ने जाते हैं, जो जालीदार टोपी लगा के चुनाव में अगर मुस्लिम ज्यादा है तो राहुल गांधी खड़े होते हैं। मैं जानता हूं, हर भारतीय का दिल जानता है, पीओके भी वापस आएगा देश में, मोदी जी है तो मुमकिन है। लाउड स्पीकर बंद, चलिए उत्तर प्रदेश मारिए।
Now, what is the exact issue? The BBC was surveyed this week, just like Newslaundry was surveyed in 2021. What is the survey? Watch this episode to find out. The income tax survey on BBC is going on as we record this show. Although we don't have the exact allegations, according to sources, BBC was being surveyed for income tax evasion and diversion of profits. Sources also say that BBC was sent several notices to comply with transfer pricing rules, but they didn't respond. Now, what are transfer pricing rules? Quite simply, these rules govern transactions between two companies that are related to each other. So, this means rules that basically govern transactions and billings between a BBC UK and a BBC India. IT department has every right to seek answers, scrutinize, and make sure companies comply. But when the IT department's survey is accompanied by a national televised press conference by this guy, you know कि इशारों इशारों में क्या मैसेज दिया जा रहा है।
विश्व पटल पर किस तरह से श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में भारत आगे बढ़ रहा है, G20 की अध्यक्षता कर रहा है। बहुत सी ऐसी शक्तियां हैं जिनको ये बिल्कुल नहीं भाता है।
बहुत सी ऐसी शक्तियां हैं जिनको ये बिल्कुल नहीं भाता।
BJP's official spokesperson just had to speak for 20 minutes. After that, BJP's unofficial spokespersons took over. What Mr. Bhatia said was repeated and endorsed by some of our primetime superstars, obviously.
देश की प्रधानमंत्री श्रीमती इंदिरा गांधी जी ने खुद बीबीसी पे बैन लगाया।
बीबीसी पर 2 साल के लिए बैन लगा दिया गया था इंदिरा गांधी जी ने।
इंदिरा गांधी की सरकार ने बीबीसी इंडिया के संचालन और उसके भारत में प्रसारण पर रोक लगा दी थी।
अगर कुछ गलत किया नहीं है, कानून का पालन किया है, तो फिर डर कैसा?
अगर बीबीसी ने कुछ गलत नहीं किया है तो उसे डरने की कोई आवश्यकता नहीं है।
दुख की बात यह है कि बीबीसी का प्रोपेगेंडा और कांग्रेस का एजेंडा एक साथ मेल खाता।
सवाल यह है कि बीबीसी की गुलामी को सलामी देकर आखिर कांग्रेस क्या साबित करना चाहती है?
Yes, the BBC has had a history of tensions with the Indian government and in India. In fact, giving fun nicknames to BBC has been a national pastime of sorts. And Arnab and Gaurav are not the first to give innovative full forms to BBC. Subhash Chandra Bose had famously called BBC the Bluff and Bluster Corporation when he started the Azad Hind Radio to counter BBC/British propaganda. After independence, BBC got into quite a bit of trouble with the Indian government, again for documentaries. In 1960s, French documentary filmmaker Louis Malle visited India and made 2 documentaries for the BBC. One was called Calcutta.
Pourquoi êtes-vous ici? Elles m'ont ramassé dans la rue. Je n'ai rien mangé depuis plusieurs jours. Calcutta est une ville difficile.
Funny thing about bans is that they never work. Anyway, this movie made Indians living abroad pretty uncomfortable. It also made the Indian government uncomfortable.
दिल की दौलत लुट गई, एक शान बाकी रह गई और ताकत अपनी ही जा चुकी, एक जान बाकी रह गई.
Ce lépreux qui récite un poème en ourdou, la langue des musulmans de l'Inde, était fonctionnaire du gouvernement. La maladie lui a fait perdre son emploi et quitter sa famille. Il est devenu mendiant.
The second film by Louis Malle was a 7-part documentary series called Phantom India, which was about India's religions, rituals and culture through a very Gora lens. Louis Malle had said that that was one of his favorite works, but the Indian government and the Indian diaspora abroad was unhappy with this one-sided, cliched portrayal, and the Indian government banned BBC from filming anything in India. It was a short-lived ban, but a ban nonetheless. After this, during the emergency, Indira Gandhi introduced draconian and repressive regulations to limit free press. Journalists were asked to sign a document. The BBC reporter back then, Mark Tully, refused to sign this document and he was asked to leave the country.
Immediately after the emergency was declared, they instituted a system of censorship, and it got more and more strict and more ridiculous. They said, this is the document, you sign this document or you go. And so I put the document to the BBC and they said, you can't sign this. So I got a telephone call saying, please leave the country within 24 hours.
Now, what did this document say?
You shouldn't report anything the opposition said. You shouldn't report that all the opposition leaders were in prison. So you would be giving the impression that Parliament was functioning and everything was fine.
Don't report on what the opposition is saying. Don't report that opposition leaders are in jail. During the emergency, journalists were stopped from reporting on what the opposition was saying. Basically, they just had to say, Sab Changasi! Cut to 2023 and there's no need to make anyone sign any document. No anchor needs to sign anything. सब अपनी श्रद्धा अनुसार ऑपोजिशन को रोज रात को गाली देते हैं खुद ब खुद. ऑपोजिशन लीडर्स कुछ कहना चाहे तो उन्हें चुप करा देते हैं. ऑपोजिशन लीडर्स मोदी गवर्नमेंट की आलोचना करें तो उनके लीडर्स का फेडर डाउन कर देते हैं. डॉक्यूमेंट साइन कराने की कोई ज़रूरत है ही नहीं. और जब ऑपोजिशन लीडर्स पे ईडी आईटी के छापे पड़ते हैं तो सब ताली बजाने के लिए तैयार रहते हैं. Indira Gandhi, you walked so that Modi ji could run. Back to the BBC. Yes, it was banned during the emergency and yes, the Congress did it. But what were journalists doing back then? Protesting against the emergency and Indira Gandhi's draconian laws. They were not celebrating it or saying, "Wah, Mrs. Gandhi, wah, aap to Vishwa Guru hain." Many of them even went to jail. Most of them were opposed to her. The BBC was part of this news ecosystem that stood up to the emergency. In fact, in her book, Kumi Kapoor says the public trust in the BBC was so strong that anti-government forces during the emergency would often push stories, claiming the BBC had broadcast it. अरे तुमने देखा नहीं ये रिपोर्ट BBC में आई थी, सच्ची होगी अगर BBC में आई है. इतनी क्रेडिबिलिटी थी BBC की, हमारी नहीं, कोमी कपूर की नहीं, मोदी जी की सुन लो.
जब तक हमारे देश में आकाशवाणी थी, दूरदर्शन थी, लिमिटेड अखबार थे, तब तक आम आदमी के बीच बात क्या होती थी? ये कहते थे यार ये तो मैंने बीबीसी पे सुना है, यानी उससे हमारे देश की आकाशवाणी कह रही है भरोसा नहीं, दूरदर्शन कह रहा है भरोसा नहीं, अखबार इतने खर्चा करके निकल रहा है भरोसा नहीं. वो कह रहा है नहीं यार मैंने बीबीसी पर सुना है. अब ये जो क्रेडिबिलिटी है.
Now the BBC is not above criticism. The white gaze, the colonial white man's burden with which it sometimes sees the world, the erroneous reporting it's done, the stories it chooses, the treatment of its stories, all of it can and should be criticized. In fact, many people do criticize the BBC, so much so that there's an entire Wikipedia page on the criticism of the BBC. We're not saying you can't criticize the BBC, but it matters how you criticize it, and it certainly matters who is criticizing it.
कि बीबीसी के पत्रकारों में बेसिक इकोनॉमिक्स की समझ बहुत कम है.
अच्छा सुधीर जी,
बीबीसी के पत्रकारों को बेसिक इकोनॉमिक्स की समझ बहुत कम है और इसीलिए वो जब अर्थशास्त्र से जुड़े मामलों में रिपोर्टिंग करते हैं तो इसे बढ़ा चढ़ाकर पेश किया जाता है.
अरे बीबीसी, सुधीर जी से थोड़ा सीख लेते अर्थशास्त्र के बारे में.
2000 रुपए के हर एक नोट पर NGC यानी नैनो GPS चिप लगा हुआ होगा.
Over at Firstpost, Palki was reading from the same report in proper English.
Let me show you the findings of the British media regulator Ofcom. It says BBC journalists lack basic understanding of subjects and present data, and I'm quoting again, in the most alarming ways possible.
Both these graduates from the Z News School of Journalism did not go into the very tiny detail that the report they're reading from was commissioned by the BBC itself. मतलब ये report BBC ने खुद कराई, खुद से बनाई. Over the past few years, the BBC has been getting a lot of criticism, and so they decided to fix it by opening themselves up to criticism and improvement. In 2021, the BBC decided to go for a proper review of its editorial standards to improve impartiality and trust. In this review, the BBC newsroom was opened up and questioned by journalists and economists. This review found that too many journalists lack understanding of basic economics in the BBC, though that could be said about many newsrooms. The review said that though BBC journalists are not heavily politically biased, their views on economics are limited and often too stuck. The BBC looked at the review and said, okay, let's think of ways in which we can improve. After this review, this is what the boring Broadcasting Corporation had to say. The review as a whole provides clear indications for how we can improve editorial standards and audience impact as a result. So, bhai, Palki and Sudhir read from the report but didn't tell you that the report was BBC's way of Atmachintan and self-improvement. BBC is actively taking steps to become better. Only those from the Z News School of Journalism can use something like that against the organization itself. After all, in Z News, downright unethical behavior is not only tolerated, it's celebrated. It determines your success.
This model pay model.
इन सब से अच्छा तो अर्नब है. At least his propaganda is grand. कुछ मजा तो आता है ये conspiracy सुनने में.
The BBC is funded by China. The BBC is paid for by China. China pays the BBC. The BBC is on Chinese payrolls. Millions are being pumped into the BBC by the Chinese. Did the BBC take money from China? The BBC is directly getting millions, maybe billions from the Chinese.
China must be a really bad funder. I mean, इतना पैसा दिया BBC को और ये फिर भी चाइना पर नेगेटिव रिपोर्टिंग करते हैं. एहसान फरामोश BBC. जिस थाली में खाते हो उसी में छेद करते हो. देखा अर्नब? Look at all the reporting they've done on China.
Now, women in China's so-called re-education camps have been systematically raped and tortured.
They did whatever evil their mind could think of.
Behind these blue steel walls in a former school is what China calls a vocational training center. but it looks more like a prison. China used to deny that these places exist. But now we're being given a tour. The message? These are schools, not prisons.
After reporting on Xinjiang, China banned BBC. And this is what a Chinese minister had to say about the BBC.
这就是为什么我们觉得 BBC 面临着一个信誉危机，你们自己需要采取行动，做出努力来改变人们对 BBC 的这种印象。
Did Palki write her speech?
可是它国际频道，它就不受任何的监管，它有尚方宝剑，它可以肆意的炮制虚假信息，而不受到任何法律方面的监管和制裁。
So, China has attacked BBC World Service for spreading fake news, and India is attacking the BBC World Service for spreading Chinese-funded fake news. Can someone help me connect the dots? This is some Inception-level shit. Is the BBC World Service funded by China? Big question. No. But the BBC's sponsored content team, Storyworks, has taken money from Chinese company Huawei to produce shiny ads.
Huawei is a $100 billion company. They have operations in 170 countries. Most people think that Huawei has come from nowhere, when in actual fact it's taken 30 years to get to where they're going.
在我那个小时候，我在那个县呢，这个乡镇呢，其实是很贫穷的。我们家庭就算好一点的，因为我们父母都是教师嘛。
And that, kids, is what you call branded content. From exposing Xinjiang to wah Huawei wah. क्या करना पड़ता है ad money के लिए. The BBC has been reporting on Chinese human rights violations. But when it comes to sustaining their journalism worldwide, they sometimes have to take money from corporations, and sometimes these corporations can be Chinese companies with a dubious history. Just like Arnab sometimes has to run advertisements of Chinese phones during his anti-China debates.
Enough is enough. Make China pay. Powered by MI10. Hashtag China Get Out. Powered by Vivo.
So you see, this is not a conspiracy. This is the reality of an ad-driven news model where you often have to take money from people you report on. Many BBC correspondents were upset when they saw the BBC's promotional films showering praise on Huawei. A senior BBC journalist reportedly said the corporation should be ashamed of the promotion, while another reporter said they nearly threw up after watching a video. Forget throwing up. Many Indian TV news anchors will happily swallow government ads and sing praises. Heck, they do a better job of advertising for the government free of cost. So, whatever Arnab may say, it's not a Chinese conspiracy against India. The fault is in the news model, silly. Jab tak news will be dependent on ads, newswallas will have to keep taking money from governments and corporations. Some of these governments can do some very bad things, and some of these corporations can do very shady things. Which is why we say, if you want truly an independent news media ecosystem, you need to pay to keep news free. At News Laundry, we're completely ad-free. No Chinese money, no Indian government money, no money from any corporations, 100% Shuddh, Desi-free, public interest news. So if you like what we do, subscribe to newslaundry.com and pay to keep news free. We need it now more than ever. That's all the nuisance we have for you this week. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay mad. That's the only way. Thank you so much, guys, for watching that episode. Please like this episode. Please share it with your friends and family. The more you like this episode, the more it'll be watched. Remember, our main message with this episode is that you should criticize the media. You should question the media. You should question everyone in the media, including News Laundry. But you should question them on facts, on proof, and you should question them intelligently. So don't fall for this Chinese propaganda, conspiracy theories that are doing the rounds. Watch BBC, make up your own mind by watching other stuff, and use critical thinking to critique the media. That's what we strongly believe in News Laundry. We believe in Sabki Dhulai. We don't think anyone is above criticism. So go ahead, criticize, but don't ask for bans. Don't ask for jailing journalists. And of course, use your brain.